Welcome to my channel. Today we delve into a chilling tale that began like any other peaceful day above the clouds, a day when the sun shimmered over endless blue skies and two aircrafts soared thousands of feet apart, unaware that fate was guiding them toward the same point in the sky, the same second in time, the same tragic collision that would change the very rules of aviation forever. This is the story of how two flights, carrying hope, families, and dreams, crossed paths in one of the most haunting accidents in aviation history. It began early that morning, when the control tower at a major European airport buzzed with calm routine. The air traffic controllers were alert but relaxed, screens glowed softly, radar dots blinked peacefully, and two call signs were logged almost at the same moment. One belonged to a passenger jet bound for Barcelona, the other a cargo aircraft on its way to Brussels. Both experienced crews, both cleared for their routes. The skies were clear, visibility perfect, no storms, no turbulence. Nothing to fear, yet hidden behind that calm was a chain of errors so small, so human, that no one could have foreseen the catastrophe waiting above. Inside the passenger jet, the atmosphere was light, children laughed, a young couple whispered about their honeymoon, an elderly man scribbled postcards to his grandchildren. The captain, a calm and seasoned pilot named Larson, smiled at his first officer. "Perfect day to fly," he said. Outside, sunlight cut through clouds like silver, the world below peaceful and unaware. Miles away, in another cockpit, Captain Schmidt of the cargo flight adjusted his autopilot settings. His co-pilot checked navigation. The hum of engines filled the silence. Everything looked normal, until the first radar warning blinked red on both aircraft. At first, neither crew took it seriously. Traffic warnings were common, and in aviation, one trusted the system. Traffic advisory, the computerized voice said. Then seconds later, it changed. Climb now. The passenger jet's computer ordered, but the cargo jet system, in a cruel twist of fate, commanded the opposite. Descend now. Both crews, confused by conflicting instructions, reacted at the same time, one pulling up, the other diving, their fates sealed in that instant. Down in the control tower, panic rippled across the room. Radar screens flickered as the two blips moved closer. A young controller named Elena tried to radio both planes. "Flight 293, maintain altitude, do not climb." But static filled the air, her voice trembling as she repeated, "Cargo 611, maintain level, confirm." No response, her heart pounded. She looked at her supervisor who whispered, "They're converging." The entire room went silent. The radar screen showed two green dots merging into one. In the sky above the Alps, passengers on the jet felt a sudden jolt. A mother reached for her child. Coffee spilled. Someone gasped as the aircraft lurched. In the cockpit, Captain Larson pulled hard on the yoke. Alarms screamed, red lights flashed. He shouted, "We're climbing too fast!" At the same moment, the cargo crew saw something through the windshield. A flash, a blur, a silver belly of another plane directly ahead. Schmidt's last words were, "Dear God," before metal met metal at hundreds of miles per hour. The collision tore through the silence of the sky like thunder. Fire erupted, fragments of fuselage scattered, debris rained down over miles of countryside. Witnesses below described a fiery shower falling from heaven. Pieces of the passenger jet's wings spun into fields. Parts of the cargo plane's tail were found in a forest hours later. For a moment, the sky itself seemed to scream, then nothing, just silence, smoke, and falling ash. Rescue teams rushed through dark roads, sirens echoing through mountain valleys. Firefighters, paramedics, volunteers, all hoping for survivors. They found twisted wreckage, luggage, photographs, letters still sealed. But no life. A teddy bear half-burned lay beside a scorched wing, a symbol of everything lost in one terrible instant. At dawn, when helicopters circled the crash site, investigators realized something horrifying. The accident didn't happen because of mechanical failure, but because two systems designed to save lives gave opposite commands. Days later, the investigation began. Journalists flooded the scene, headlines screamed, "Sky collision over Europe." The world mourned, but inside the aviation world, something deeper was happening. The black boxes revealed the last words of both crews, voices filled with confusion, fear, and duty. Experts listened to the recordings in stunned silence. "Climb, climb now," said one voice. "Descend, descend," said the other. And then a single, heart-stopping sound. The impact. In the aftermath, questions turned to blame. Air traffic control faced criticism, engineers defended the safety systems, governments demanded answers, and families demanded justice. But amidst the grief, a quiet realization emerged. This wasn't just human error, it was the perfect storm of timing, technology, and miscommunication. A moment that proved even perfection in aviation could fail when two human instincts collided. In the months that followed, aviation authorities around the world united to change the rules. The systems that once confused pilots were rewritten, new protocols introduced, air traffic and onboard computers were forced to speak the same language. Every pilot, every controller, every trainee learned about this disaster. Their training now echoed with one phrase: follow the onboard collision system first. But for those who lost loved ones, the change came too late. In small villages below the crash zone, memorials rose on green hills, names carved into stone, candles flickered beside photos. Every anniversary, families gathered under the open sky, listening to the silence, and sometimes, when a jet flew overhead, the sound carried both pain and peace, a reminder of how fragile life is, and how every improvement in safety is written in the language of loss. The story of this collision didn't just rewrite the rules of aviation. It rewrote the understanding of human limits, of technology, of fate itself. It stands as a symbol of what happens when systems fail and humanity must learn, change, and rebuild from ashes. Today, every time you board a plane, every time your captain speaks calmly about safety, remember, it's because of the lessons written in fire on that summer night above the Alps. And as the sun sets beyond the horizon, we remember them, not just as victims of an accident, but as voices that changed the skies forever. Their story lives in every pilot's handbook, in every tower's procedure, in every safe landing that follows. This was the day when the sky fell silent and humanity learned to listen. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to the channel. Every week we explore real stories that changed the world of aviation, stories of courage, lessons, and the people who made flying safer for all of us. Your support helps keep these memories alive. See you in the next story, and until then, stay safe under open skies. The sun had long set over the horizon when the investigation reached its second and darkest phase. Deep inside a cold hangar, under floodlights, investigators laid out fragments of both aircraft, burned metal, twisted wires, shattered cockpit glass. The silence there was heavy, broken only by the sound of pencils scratching notes and quiet whispers among experts who had seen hundreds of crashes but never one like this. Each piece of debris told a story: a broken switch here, a scorched gauge there, a flight manual covered in soot. But what none of them could understand yet was how two experienced crews, with clear skies and working equipment, could end up colliding head-on at thousands of feet. One engineer muttered, "Something doesn't add up," and everyone agreed. The radar tapes, black boxes, and voice recordings would have to reveal what the wreckage could not. In the following days, families gathered in makeshift halls near the crash site, faces pale, eyes empty, waiting for news that would never come. Mothers clutched photographs, fathers held trembling hands, rescue workers walked in silence, carrying personal belongings, watches, bracelets, notebooks, a small stuffed toy still smelling of smoke. Every object became a symbol of love torn from the sky. A priest stood quietly outside, praying for souls he had never met. Reporters flooded the scene with flashing cameras, narrating with solemn voices. Authorities believe two planes collided in midair over the Alps late last night, killing everyone on board. The words echoed across living rooms and radios, but behind the polished reports, the real story was chaos, confusion, and heartbreak beyond description. In a quiet corner of the investigation room, a woman named Dr. Mara Eklund, an aviation safety specialist, listened again and again to the final moments recorded in the cockpit voice recorder, her headphones pressed tightly, her face pale as she replayed the same seconds over and over. "Traffic advisory, climb, climb now," one voice said, then the other, "Descend, descend." The overlapping shouts of two desperate crews, the haunting sound of a scream, then static. She removed the headphones and whispered to herself. They both obeyed. It was the clue that would open the mystery. The systems on both planes, known as TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance Systems, had issued conflicting commands, and both pilots, doing exactly what they were trained to do, ended up following instructions that brought them into each other's paths. Meanwhile, Air Traffic Controller Elena, who had been on duty that night, hadn't slept for days. She sat in front of her blank monitor, replaying the radar sequence in her mind. She remembered shouting into the radio, begging them to maintain altitude, but the signals never got through. Static, interference, timing, all conspiring against her. She attended every hearing, her eyes swollen, her voice breaking. "I tried," she said to investigators. "I told them not to climb, but the system's logic had overruled her commands, a decision made by machines, executed by humans, sealed by fate." The media turned the story into a storm. Headlines called it, "The Tragedy in the Sky." Documentaries aired late at night, showing burning wreckage and crying families. People around the world watched in disbelief. It was unthinkable. Two planes, perfectly functional, with trained pilots and clear weather, destroyed by miscommunication. In talk shows, experts argued, should pilots always trust their instruments, or their instincts? Others debated, should air traffic control have final authority over collision avoidance? Every voice had an opinion, but the families had only silence. Their grief was not about blame. It was about loss, empty rooms, unanswered calls, birthdays that would never come. Weeks later, investigators reconstructed the exact sequence second by second, one flight climbing, one descending, the radio lag, the time delay between system warnings. It was all there in cold numbers and graphs, but no chart could capture the fear in the voices of those pilots, their final seconds spent trying to save their passengers. Dr. Eklund stood before the committee and said softly, "This was not pilot error. This was a human trapped between two masters, the machine and the mind." Her words carried weight, for they spoke not of fault, but of humanity's delicate balance with technology. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A small line of code buried deep in the system's logic, designed years earlier, stated that when TCAS issued a command, pilots should obey it, even if it conflicted with ground control. However, the training manuals in some countries still instructed pilots to prioritize the controller's voice, and in this case, both pilots acted differently. One followed the system, the other the human voice. In that single divergence, destiny was written. The committee called it a fatal split of trust. When the final report was released, it was over 1,000 pages long, describing every microsecond of that night, every system pulse, every breath caught on tape. But the conclusion was short and devastating. The collision occurred due to contradictory TCAS advisories, inadequate training standardization, and communication breakdown between aircraft and control. Those few words reshaped global aviation policy forever. Governments demanded reforms. Software companies rewrote safety protocols. Airlines retrained their pilots with new universal commands. From that day forward, the rule was simple: always trust the system first, then verify. But behind the technical success was a trail of broken lives. Captain Larson's wife refused to believe it was no one's fault. She told reporters, "He was a good man. He loved flying. He would never make a mistake." And she was right. He hadn't, no one had, yet all had paid the price. In a lonely village at the base of the mountains, candles were lit every night by those who found the debris. They called it the Field of Silent Echoes, because when the wind passed through the valley, it made the sound of whistling, like a jet far above, haunting, endless. In one particularly emotional memorial, a child stood clutching a framed photo of his father, a flight attendant lost in the disaster. He asked quietly, "When do planes stop falling?" No one had an answer, except an old pilot standing nearby who placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "When we stop forgetting." Those words became the unofficial motto of the aviation community, a vow that every loss must be remembered, every mistake studied, every silence turned into safety. As years passed, documentaries revisited the event, calling it a turning point in aviation history. They showed clips of radar animations, the dots merging, the sound of alarms, the human voices trying to fight fate. Pilots around the world still train with simulations based on that collision, their instructors telling them, "This is why procedures matter." And yet, even with all that progress, the haunting truth remains. Sometimes the sky gives no second chances, and the most advanced systems in the world can still bow to the smallest of human hesitations. The skies over Europe grew safer, but the memory of that summer night remained etched into every pilot's mind. Every time they heard the traffic alert system speak in its calm mechanical voice, "Traffic, traffic," there was always a flicker of memory, a reminder of the lives lost to miscommunication, and how their sacrifice paved the way for the safety of millions who would fly after them. In the end, it wasn't just about changing a rule, it was about changing how humanity listens. To machines, to each other, and to the silence between both. The weeks after the final report felt like a slow descent into silence. The world had already moved on to new headlines, but for those connected to the collision, time stopped on that night. In a small apartment overlooking Zurich, Elena, the controller, sat by her window each evening staring at the blinking lights of planes overhead. Every light in the sky was a reminder of the two she lost. She had replayed the radar sequence thousands of times in her head. She knew every movement by heart. The steady glide, the warning flash, the collision, and that frozen second when two green dots became one. The guilt was unbearable. Though every investigation cleared her of wrongdoing, the weight on her chest never lifted. She stopped answering calls, stopped sleeping, and kept a framed photo of the radar screen from that night on her desk as if to punish herself for surviving what others didn't. One night, she received a letter without a return address. The envelope was old, creased, and inside it was a note written in shaky handwriting. "My husband was the captain of the cargo plane. I heard your voice on the radio that night. I know you tried. You don't need to carry our pain. You already carry enough." Elena read it over and over, tears streaming down her face. She had never met this woman, yet in that moment, it felt like she had finally been forgiven, not by a system, not by an investigation, but by someone who understood what it meant to be powerless in the face of tragedy. She placed the letter inside the frame beside the radar photo and whispered, "Thank you." Meanwhile, in another part of the world, a training facility in Texas became the center of a quiet revolution. Inside a large white simulator dome, pilots from around the globe gathered to train under new collision avoidance protocols. The air inside smelled of coffee and metal. Screens surrounded the mock cockpit, showing endless blue skies. The instructor, Captain Raymond Clark, a veteran who had lost two close friends in the collision, stood in front of the trainees and said in a steady, heavy voice, "Remember this, machines don't panic, but humans do, and in that moment your decision defines history." He then pressed a button and the simulation began. Alarms screamed. Traffic, traffic, red lights flashed. The simulator jolted as the students reacted, some climbing, some freezing. Clark stopped the exercise and shouted, "Never doubt your training, never argue with the system, follow it, trust it, and if your heart races, let it, but your hands must stay calm." Every session was brutal, emotional, intense, and when the lights dimmed at the end of the day, some pilots sat quietly, staring at the simulated horizon, realizing that every flight from now on carried not just passengers but memories. They knew that the tragedy above the Alps had changed their profession forever. In one corner, a young pilot named Aiden recorded a message to himself, his voice trembling slightly. "I'll never forget them, I'll never let their mistake be in vain." He didn't know it then, but years later, he would become a captain who would save his own flight by following those very procedures, proving that lessons written in pain could still save lives. Across the ocean, in a small mountain village where the wreckage had fallen, life slowly returned, yet nothing was ever the same. Locals still found fragments of metal in their fields years later, a piece of engine here, a strip of fuselage there. Sometimes children would play near the memorial site, chasing butterflies over the wildflowers that grew where fire once burned. At sunset, the villagers gathered around the memorial stone, their voices soft, reading aloud the names of those lost, and, as night fell, they would light lanterns and release them into the sky, tiny dots of light rising until they disappeared into the same heavens that once betrayed them. The gesture became tradition, not of mourning, but of remembrance. There was one old man among them who had seen the collision with his own eyes, a farmer named Otto. He still remembered that night vividly. The flash in the sky, the roar that followed, the falling fire that turned night into day. When reporters once asked him what he thought when he saw it, he replied, "It looked like the stars fell to earth," and for years after, he refused to fly, not out of fear, but respect. He would say, "We are not meant to forget the sky's silence." He often helped visiting families find the exact spots where their loved ones were discovered. He never asked for money. He only asked that they plant a flower before they left, so the ground would always remember. Back in the cities, the aviation community faced its own reckoning. Software engineers gathered at conferences under banners that read, "Never again," and long debates raged over the balance between human instinct and machine authority. The old generation of pilots argued that too much automation was making people forget how to think, while younger aviators insisted that technology saved more lives than it cost. In one heated session, a retired captain slammed his fist on the table and said, "We keep building smarter machines, but we forget fear, confusion, trust. Those are still human, and machines don't feel them." His voice silenced the room, because everyone knew he was right. The reforms that followed went beyond the technical. Airlines began mandatory counseling programs for pilots after close calls, psychological resilience training was introduced, and every new recruit had to watch the documentary made about the mid-air collision before their first solo command. The footage, the sounds, the transcripts, all of it served as a living reminder, one that kept the skies safer through remembrance rather than fear. In classrooms, young cadets sat in silence as they watched grainy black and white photos of the wreckage, the narration soft and steady. Every safety regulation you follow was paid for by someone who didn't come home, and when the screen faded to black, there was always a long pause. Then the instructor would ask, "What would you have done?" Some answered confidently, others just lowered their eyes, realizing that courage is not about being fearless, it's about facing fear and still doing what's right. For the families, the years brought slow healing, but grief has no calendar. Some found peace through advocacy, pushing for air safety reforms, others simply withdrew from the world. One woman, the widow of a passenger, started an organization called the Silent Sky Foundation. Its mission simple: to support families of air crash victims. She toured airports, schools, and conferences, telling her story, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, reminding everyone that behind every statistic was a heartbeat. Her words touched millions, and in one speech she said, "My husband's flight never landed, but his story did, in the hearts of those who made sure it never happened again." The audience stood and applauded, some wiping tears, because even tragedy can birth strength. And through it all, one truth echoed louder than any black box recording: humanity learns best not through triumph, but through tragedy. The mid-air collision didn't just change aviation rules, it changed how we view the sky. It taught us that perfection doesn't exist, that safety is not a promise, but a pursuit, one that never ends. And somewhere, high above, where the clouds drift quietly and the winds hum softly, maybe, just maybe, the souls lost that night still watch over every flight that takes off, whispering into the silence, "Keep going, keep learning, keep flying." Years later, the echoes of that night still lingered across skies and cities, but now they carried a different weight. Not just grief, but change, progress, remembrance. It was a cool morning when aviation leaders from across the world gathered for the Global Safety Reform Conference in Geneva, a symbolic location chosen not for convenience but for meaning. Just miles from where the tragedy had unfolded, banners hung in the glass-walled hall that read, "Every life counts." Delegates from over 50 nations sat in silence as a large screen showed real footage from the crash investigation, the haunting radar image of two blips merging into one. The room stayed utterly still. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector and the distant murmur of jet engines passing overhead. Then, a man stepped to the podium. Captain Raymond Clark, now older, silver-haired, the same instructor who once trained young pilots in Texas. His voice was calm but carried years of sorrow. "We cannot rewrite that night," he said, "but we can make sure no one else pays for the same silence." His words filled the hall like thunder, and the applause that followed was not of celebration, but of unity. During the conference, engineers unveiled a new update for the Global Collision Avoidance System, one designed to eliminate conflicting commands forever. The new model, they called it TCAS-X, could communicate not just between planes, but with satellites and control towers in real time, preventing confusion and sharing decisions instantly. It was a marvel of technology born directly from loss. One engineer softly said to a journalist, "It took 300 lives to fix one line of code," and the world finally understood the cost behind progress. On the final day of the summit, families of the victims were invited to attend. They sat in the front row, holding photos of their loved ones as speakers from every nation pledged to enforce the new system globally, and when the session ended, they stood together and released white balloons through the open ceiling window, rising slowly, silently, disappearing into the same endless blue that once betrayed them. But while the world looked forward, some hearts still lingered in the past. Elena, the controller, had moved away from the city and was living near the sea. She worked quietly as a flight communication consultant, teaching young trainees about the importance of clarity under pressure. Every year, she visited the memorial site in the mountains, placing fresh flowers beneath the engraved names. She would sit for hours, listening to the wind whistle through the cliffs. Sometimes she could almost hear their voices, the faint echo of radio chatter carried by the air. "Traffic advisory, climb now." It wasn't real, but to her, it was a reminder that silence can speak louder than any sound. She would whisper softly. I still remember, before leaving, the mountains always answering her with their quiet, endless breath. In another part of the world, a story was unfolding high above the clouds that would bring closure in an unexpected way. Two veteran captains, both nearing retirement, had volunteered for a special flight, Flight Remembrance 01, a commemorative route retracing the paths of the two doomed aircraft. Their mission was not to mourn, but to honor. The flight carried no passengers, only crew, journalists, and representatives from aviation safety boards. As the plane ascended, the cabin grew quiet. The captain spoke over the intercom, his voice steady but emotional. "Today we fly not in sorrow, but in gratitude, to those who taught us what safety truly means." The co-pilot, a young woman who had studied the incident during her training, sat silently, watching the altimeter rise. They reached the same altitude where the collision had once occurred, the exact coordinates logged in memory and history. The captain switched to manual control and said, "This one's for them." Then the aircraft performed a slow, gentle roll over the site, sunlight reflecting off its wings like silver tears. On the ground below, hundreds had gathered in the village valley, looking up as the plane passed overhead. Some clapped, others cried quietly. One elderly woman whispered, "They came back," as the jet left a single white contrail across the sky, cutting through the blue like a promise that the past would never be forgotten. The air grew still afterward, the sound fading into peace. The flight landed hours later with applause from the control tower, and when the captain stepped out, he was greeted by survivors' families holding flowers. One child handed him a folded paper plane and said, "For the ones who didn't land." He smiled, tears forming. "They landed in us," he replied softly. Later that evening, a candlelight vigil was held at the memorial garden built on the old crash site. the names of every victim etched into black granite. The reflection of flames danced across the stone. Families, officials, and pilots gathered under a star-filled sky. The same sky that once bore witness to tragedy now shimmered with quiet forgiveness. A choir sang softly in the background, their voices blending with the cool mountain wind. Elena stood among them, holding the letter she once received. She finally met the woman who had written it. They embraced without words, two strangers bound forever by one night of fate. When the ceremony ended, candles were placed around the base of the monument, forming a glowing path leading up the hill. From above, it looked like a runway of light leading into heaven. News outlets around the world covered the event, calling it the flight that healed the sky. The footage spread online, watched by millions who had forgotten the story, and suddenly, it was remembered again, not as just another tragedy, but as a lesson, a turning point, a symbol of unity between human courage and machine intelligence. One journalist's closing words captured it perfectly. From the wreckage of two planes, humanity built wings stronger than ever, and for once those words felt true. Years passed, but the memory never faded. Every anniversary, airlines around the world dimmed their runway lights for 1 minute, honoring the victims of the mid-air collision. Pilots bowed their heads before takeoff, flight attendants held hands, and passengers, unaware, traveled through skies made safer by the lessons of that night. The story lived on not in fear, but in reverence. The world had moved forward, yet it still looked back, grateful, humbled, changed. And somewhere high above, where the clouds meet eternity, the souls of those lost that night were finally at peace, their voices no longer filled with panic or confusion, but calm like wind brushing through open sky. And if one listened closely on quiet nights near the Alps, they could swear they still heard faint echoes of that long-ago flight. Steady, rhythmic, endless, the sound of wings carrying hope once again through the heavens. As years slipped quietly into decades, the memory of that night became legend in the aviation world, not a ghost story told in fear, but a lesson written into the very DNA of flight. Every pilot, every engineer, every student of the skies carried a part of it, and from that tragedy grew something greater. Progress born from pain, humanity's promise that no life would be lost in vain. New technology reshaped the way the world looked at air travel. TCASX evolved into a living network that linked every plane, every tower, and every satellite across the globe, a web of light that pulsed invisibly through the atmosphere, guiding aircraft safely even through the darkest storms. In control rooms, digital radar replaced blinking dots with real-time 3D projections, and controllers could now see not just the location of each plane, but its intent, its trajectory, its heartbeat in the sky. Airlines began naming their simulators after the victims, a tribute so subtle yet powerful. Cadets who stepped into those cockpits saw engraved plates that read, "Dedicated to the souls of Flight 293 and Cargo 611. They knew instantly what that meant. It was no longer just training. It was remembrance in motion. In the years that followed, the Silent Sky Foundation, born from grief and courage, grew into an international organization, spreading awareness about air safety, providing scholarship for aviation students, and creating support networks for families of crash victims worldwide. The woman who started it, now older, stood on countless stages sharing her message, her voice firm yet gentle. "Safety isn't numbers, it's names," she would say, and the audience, from CEOs to cadets, would always rise in applause. Her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to every passenger who ever looked out an airplane window and trusted the sky. Meanwhile, deep inside a hangar in Seattle, a team of engineers unveiled something breathtaking, a next-generation cockpit interface that used artificial intelligence to interpret human tone, stress, and hesitation, learning to detect when a pilot was overwhelmed and offering calm guidance. "Breathe," it would say softly through the speakers. "You're safe, follow me." The idea wasn't to replace humans, but to remind them they were not alone, the lead engineer explained. "We built empathy into the system because machines don't feel, but they can learn to understand. The concept was inspired by transcripts from the collision's black boxes, where both crews had shown courage, confusion, and heartbreak in their final moments. That emotion now became data, and data became compassion. On the anniversary of the tragedy's 20th year, a new memorial flight took place, this time aboard a state-of-the-art aircraft equipped with the latest systems. Families of victims, investigators, and journalists filled the cabin. Among them was Elena, older now, her hair silver, her eyes softer but still carrying the same quiet sadness. She sat by the window as the engines roared to life, feeling the familiar vibration beneath her feet. She hadn't flown in years, her hands trembled slightly, but when the plane lifted through the clouds, a calm washed over her. Outside, the sky looked endless again, pure and vast. For the first time in 2 decades, she smiled. Beside her sat the young pilot Aiden, now captain, the same man who once promised to never forget. He turned to her and said softly, "We're flying over them now." She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes, whispering, "Keep them safe this time." At 35,000 feet, the flight path traced the same route as the doomed ones before, but this time the sky was filled with dozens of planes from different airlines, all coordinated to form a silent formation overhead, their lights blinking in unison like stars choreographed by grief and honor. Passengers around the world looked out their windows that night and saw something unusual: lines of aircraft crossing in perfect harmony, glowing trails painting the night sky, unaware that it was a global tribute to a moment that changed aviation forever. On board the memorial flight, the captain's voice came through the speakers, warm and steady. "To those who gave their lives teaching us to listen to the sky, this flight is yours." The cabin fell silent, the engines hummed like a prayer, and through the intercom, the passengers heard something unexpected, a soft replay of the final black box recording, the warning tone, the voices, the confusion, then a fade into stillness, followed by a single line recorded from the memorial years ago, "Keep flying." The sound echoed through the cabin like a whisper from beyond. After landing, the world watched the ceremony broadcast live from the runway, hundreds of families holding lanterns, pilots standing in salute, ground crews bowing their heads. The memorial lights illuminated the tarmac in blue and white, the colors of the sky and hope. One by one, the families released their lanterns, and cameras captured the breathtaking sight of hundreds of glowing orbs rising into the night, drifting higher and higher until they merged with the stars. One reporter described it as "the night the sky wept light." The footage went viral, not because it was tragic, but because it was beautiful, a moment where humanity and technology stood together, both humbled and grateful. In classrooms across the globe, young pilots studied that night not as a failure, but as the birth of a safer future. Simulators now used that very event as a lesson in decision-making under pressure, and instructors reminded their students, "Every button you press, every command you hear, every choice you make, it all connects to a story written long before you took this seat." The new generation of aviators didn't fly with arrogance, but with awareness, each takeoff a silent thank you to those who came before. For Elena, her journey came full circle one quiet evening, when she received an invitation from the International Aviation Academy. They wanted her to speak at the graduation of the newest class of air traffic controllers. She hesitated, afraid her voice might tremble, but she accepted, and when she stood before the young faces, her voice was calm and firm. "The sky will always test you," she said. "But remember, you are not alone. Thousands of souls fly with you every day, those who lived and those who didn't." The room was silent, the students' eyes wide, and for the first time in decades, she didn't feel guilt anymore. She felt purpose. Her words were now the bridge between the past and the future, between what was lost and what was learned. That night, she walked out onto the Academy's rooftop terrace and looked up at the stars, the same stars that once looked down upon disaster. They seemed closer now, brighter, kinder. She whispered softly to the night, "We did it, we learned." And in that moment, a plane passed overhead, its lights glimmering through thin clouds, and she smiled, because this time, it didn't fill her with sorrow, it filled her with peace. The story of that mid-air collision had come to represent something much bigger than an accident. It became a mirror of humanity's strength, the proof that even from the ashes of metal and fire, compassion could rise, innovation could be born, and the skies could become not just a place of travel, but a testament to memory. Every rule changed, every protocol rewritten, every life saved was a continuation of that story, a living legacy that whispered to every flight, "Stay safe, stay strong, and never forget." Years drifted quietly like soft clouds, and the world of aviation moved forward, safer, wiser, calmer, yet every safety checklist, every cockpit alarm, every calm pilot's voice before takeoff still carried an invisible echo of that night when two planes became one in fire and silence. Elena was older now, her hair thin and white, her face lined with years of reflection. She lived by the sea in a small cottage filled with the sounds of gulls and distant waves. Every morning she brewed coffee and sat near her window, watching contrails cross the horizon. She had learned to love that sight again, not as a reminder of guilt, but as proof that life continued, that the sky, though once cruel, had learned to listen. On her desk rested a simple wooden box containing the letter that had once saved her, a small silver pin from her control tower days, and a folded flight map marked with two paths that crossed forever. She kept them not for pain, but gratitude, because those fragments reminded her that out of tragedy came understanding, out of silence came change. One spring afternoon, she received a letter stamped with the emblem of the International Flight Authority. It was an invitation, written in elegant handwriting. "Dear Elena, we invite you to witness the unveiling of the Global Sky Network, the final step toward a fully unified air traffic system." For a long moment she stared at the words, her hands trembling slightly. She smiled and whispered, "You finally did it." The letter included a plane ticket, flight number GS-001, a special flight, carrying engineers, pilots, and pioneers who had shaped the modern sky. She hesitated, then packed her bag, taking only her box and her courage. As she boarded the gleaming aircraft days later, the flight attendant recognized her name and said softly, "You're the reason we're all safer." Elena just nodded humbly, taking her seat by the window, her eyes reflecting the golden morning light. As the engines roared and the plane lifted through the clouds, she felt the vibration beneath her feet and closed her eyes. For a second she was back in the tower, her voice echoing through static, "Maintain altitude." But then she opened her eyes, saw the sunlight flooding the cabin, and realized that this time, everything was different. The cockpit was quiet, filled with confidence, the pilots calm and steady, their screens glowing with the Global Sky Network, a living map of every flight on Earth, each one moving like a heartbeat in the heavens. She leaned closer, seeing thousands of white dots across the world, perfectly synchronized, no confusion, no blind spots, no chance for two paths to meet in darkness again. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "You finally learned to talk to each other." Hours into the flight, the captain announced over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, in a few minutes we will pass over the site where the great mid-air collision occurred many years ago. We invite you to take a moment of silence for those who gave us the skies we have today." The engines softened, and a hush fell across the cabin. Elena pressed her hand against the glass. Looking down, far below the mountains lay quiet, green, peaceful. No sign of wreckage, no scars of fire, just wildflowers covering the slopes where pieces of two planes had once fallen. The valley shimmered in sunlight, and she smiled through her tears, whispering, "They're home now." Beside her sat a young boy traveling with his mother. He looked out curiously and asked, "Why is everyone quiet?" Elena turned to him with a gentle smile, "Because we're flying over a place that taught the world how to fly safely." The boy nodded, wide-eyed, as if realizing he was part of something sacred. When the plane landed, Elena was greeted by pilots, journalists, and officials who had read her story. The unveiling ceremony was held in a vast glass hall overlooking the runway. Sunlight poured through the windows, reflecting on hundreds of floating holographic maps displaying air routes weaving like threads of light. The president of the Aviation Board spoke first. "For decades, we studied the night when silence nearly destroyed the sky, but from that silence came unity, and from unity came safety. Today we honor every voice that was lost, and every hand that built this future. Applause filled the hall, soft but steady. Elena stood quietly among the crowd, feeling both small and infinite, the weight of years lifting gently from her shoulders. Then came the final moment. The hall darkened, and a large screen lit up with the reconstructed radar sequence from that night long ago. The two green dots appeared again, moving slowly toward each other. Hearts in the room tightened as they drew closer, but this time, something different happened. Another layer appeared, bright blue lines from the new global sky network guiding the paths away from one another. The dots diverged, missing by miles. Safe, the audience gasped softly, and the screen faded into words that glowed like stars. For every life that taught us how to protect the next. Applause broke out, some people cried quietly, and Elena, standing near the back, pressed her hand to her heart and whispered, "You did it." Later that night, she walked outside the airport and looked up at the clear sky. Planes shimmered above, their lights blinking like constellations, yet none came too close. Each one held its distance, dancing in perfect harmony. She thought of Captain Larson, Captain Schmidt, of every passenger, every child, every family that once fell from that same heaven, and she knew they had not vanished, they had become part of it, their stories woven into the air itself, forever guiding those who dared to fly. As she walked toward a waiting car, the night breeze carried the faint hum of engines far above, and she smiled, knowing the sound no longer haunted her. It comforted her. She whispered to herself, "The sky isn't silent anymore, it's singing," and somewhere deep in that endless blue, perhaps those lost souls sang too, unseen but never forgotten, their legacy written not in tears, but in every safe landing, every calm flight, every whisper of a pilot saying, "We're clear of traffic." Years later, when Elena passed away peacefully in her sleep, the aviation world mourned quietly but celebrated louder. Her letter, her story, her voice had shaped generations. At the next Global Aviation Summit, they named the main control center after her. The Elena Tower, inside its lobby, engraved in steel, were her words. "Listen to the silence, it might be teaching you something," and beneath it, a smaller inscription read, "Dedicated to the memory of those who gave their lives so the world could fly safer." Every pilot who entered touched the wall before beginning their shift, a ritual, a silent salute to those who once spoke to the sky and made it kinder. And now, every time a plane lifts into the heavens, every time passengers feel that gentle rise in their hearts as the wheels leave the ground, they are unknowingly carried by the lessons born from that night. The story lives not in mourning, but in motion, not in sadness, but in flight, and above the clouds where the sun burns eternal and the air hums with memory, humanity continues to rise, not fearless, but wiser, never forgetting that safety is a promise written by those who fell, a vow kept by those who fly, and a song sung by the sky itself. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here we keep alive the stories that changed aviation, stories of courage, of loss, of lessons that shaped the skies we trust today. Your support helps these voices echo a little longer, so the world never forgets what it cost to fly. Until next time, keep looking up, and remember, the sky is listening.